Welcome! In this video we will look at the creation of code libraries within the PowerBasic Console Compiler. This is the code we worked on in our last video, demonstrating classes. What we're going to do in this video is actually do a bit more of organisation of where our code libraries actually sit. What we're looking at here is the main code module of our project, the ccarray part3.bas file. In this file we have two include entries to include two external files to compile in with our program. In the previous video, these two files, macros include and demo class include, were both in the same folder as the .bas file. What we're going to do today is to move both of these include files into its own separate folder and reference them there. Now, in this folder you can see we have the executable, the .bas file, and the log file of the last time it was compiled. Now, I've deliberately not put the include files in here. I've put the include files into a folder called libraries, which is a folder inside this folder. There are each of our include files. I've also included the include files for file handling, random routines include file, and also the static linked library we prepared. Keeping all of these include files, which can be used across many programs, in the one folder location means that all of your applications can share the same code, making code writing and developing much faster. So how do we actually reference these? Well, in the include statement at the top of our file, we can put the path into where the file actually sits. Now, we could quite happily paste in the entire path, which would quite explicitly state where the file was, which you can do, but if you ever move your files around to different drive volumes, this would mean changing quite a lot of your source code. An easier way to do it is just to reference the relative path. So if we try to compile that now, you'll find it will find the macros, but it won't find the demo class. There we go. It's giving an error to say compiler file not found or accessible. So if we put in the libraries folder and compile now, it will compile cleanly. However, we may want to keep each of our applications in its own separate folder and to keep the libraries file above all of them. So what we've done here, we've moved the libraries folder outside the code folder which our code application was sitting in. This way you can have the libraries folder on top and each of the applications having its own specific folder. So how would you reference that in the code? Well, on the path on your include file, two dots, and this would find the library. The two dots move you up one folder and then you can go into the libraries and macros. So if we compile that now, it'll compile quite cleanly. This way it's a relative path to where your code actually sits and you're not hard coding drive paths into your code. Now, all of the videos we've covered so far all cover the console compiler. However, some of the code we've actually written, if we look at the macros themselves, the code is fine for the console compiler, but since this code specifically references console commands, which although they exist within the console compiler, when we move on later to talking about the Windows compiler, these commands will not compile, because the Windows compiler does not access the console. So, how do we actually handle that? Well, in our library here, where our console commands are in, we know that both of these macro commands both reference the console. So we want a way for the system to know that these only apply when we're compiling within the console compiler. Thankfully, PowerBasic does give you conditional if commands, preceded by the hash sign, which you could put in to say, well, if this particular constant has not been defined, it will not run this code. The PBCC32 constant is always defined when you're running the console compiler, but is never defined when you're running the Windows compiler. And since both of these sections of code do the same, will only be compiled if this statement is true. If we compile our program again now, it will compile quite cleanly. Exactly the same applies if we are doing commands in our libraries which reference the Windows compiler. So we take the same approach to that one. If we're doing something that is specifically to a window and we don't want to actually include it into the code for the console, which would error, we can use pbwin32. So the same logic will also apply to one of the other libraries we wrote, which is the file handling routines. In this, we have commands which are putting information out to the console. For example, this line here, which if we try to compile that in the Windows compiler, it would actually error. Now you can quite happily wrap that in an if, end if. And that will still compile in our console program, and it will also compile in the Windows program. It may be a bit laborious having to go through all your code putting these conditional compiles in, but it means you can use the same routines regardless of which compiler you're actually using. You can also use the #else command. So for example, if it's not the console compiler, it must be the Windows compiler, and you can put some message in, perhaps a message box to the screen. And again. And so on through the rest of your code. This shows you how you can actually reference libraries for your encode files. The exact same approach works for linked static libraries. We prepared one before, which was our random routines, so we can quite happily include that one in our code, which we have in our library here. Here is our random routines SLL. What we did previously was include it like so. All we have to do is to put in the relative path, and this would compile in quite happily. If we save that now and recompile, it compiles in fine. So in the videos that follow, we're going to be building up these libraries so we can use them in later videos. Thank you for watching.